Everybody has a record.
I have one.
Thank you, Bob. Yeah, so I wanted to briefly talk about this merge request that is work in progress, but that is trying to solve the problem of uploading CI of the copy that happens during an upload of CI artifacts. And it has to do with uploading and object storage, which is something we spent time on about a year ago from the side of Scalability frameworks. And it's sort of lucky that this problem is now being picked up, and we can help out a bit, or I'm trying to help out. So the problem is that the way uploads work in GitLab is weird, and the specific problem is that we use a gem that cares about the file name of your uploads. So when a user uploads a thing, it wants to store the thing with the correct file name. And the problem is when the upload starts, you don't know yet what the file name is supposed to be. Because if you think of CI artifacts, they all have their own database row, and that row gets created when the request is done or towards the end of the request, but the upload comes in at the start of the request. So what happens in our current setup is that we write the upload somewhere in object storage under a temporary name that we know to be wrong. And then during the active record callbacks, when we save the row for the artifact upload, we get the database ID, and then we know the actual name. And because the way the thing is written, it wants the database ID to be part of the name. So only then we know the final name of the uploaded artifact, and we need to perform either a move or a copy. And if this was local file storage, you could do a move, and a move is, if you're lucky, atomic and fast. But this is object storage, and there are no moves. So the best you have is a server-side copy, which means that you send a request to Google Cloud Storage saying, please copy this file from this key to that key. And then what Google has to do internally is that it reads out all the bytes in your blob and writes them somewhere else. And the client sits there waiting for that. And that happens as part of the callbacks of, or that happens as part of the request. I think we're already at the point where it happens outside the active record callbacks, because when this happened in active record callbacks, that would cause database contention because the callbacks run in a database transaction. So then we would have a long running transaction. This already happens outside a transaction, which is something, but it still happens during a Puma request, which also has a timeout. And the problem is it shouldn't be happening in the first place. So that merge request is from somebody who's going to try and solve this from the CI side. And that's exciting because it's a problem I want to see solved, but I had trouble making it clear how badly it needed to be solved. And now the people from CI have decided that they think this needs to be solved. And I get to help out a bit. And the solution will be that when the upload starts, you generate a random name, and then you write that random name into the database when you finalize the upload, because that random name is good enough. And you don't need to have a nice name with the row ID of the artifacts in it, because ultimately nobody looks at these blobs because there's too many of them anyway.
I think that there's a case of people constructing those URLs with the
maliciously.
No, not malicious, like maybe in a script where they go and fetch an artifact or something like that.
Oh, but no, you're confusing the URL.
Our name and the
yeah,
okay.
the internal name is
a relation between the two. Okay.
Yeah, no, we wouldn't be changing the URLs.
Yeah, okay.
The URLs work the same because the URLs contain the record ID of the artifact, and then we load that from the database, and that has this random string in it, and we know that this random string
matches
the object storage blob where the actual bytes are.
Yeah. Awesome.
So the key is really to choose the name early and not late. And um, the simplest way to choose the name is just to choose a random name and accept that it's not a pretty name. But we have to choose a name when we start storing the file. And another technical bit that was open, but I think is more or less settled now, is that these temporary uploads will get stored in Redis, these names, so that if first of all, you need to remember that this thing exists in between requests, but also if it fails, you need to delete it. So we're going to have a Redis data structure that contains all the in-progress uploads, and we periodically iterate through that whole thing and delete. They'll have timestamps, and anything that is older than an hour or something, we delete from object storage,
That is
because we also have
something
to do
that can
that.
be persisted.
Sorry?
This is something that can really be persisted.
Here it makes sense that we persisted, yes. But the good thing is that we're only storing the name of a blob. We're not storing the contents of a blob, and it's probably going to be a Redis hash. The number of elements in this hash is the number of uploads that are in flight. So that's a limited number. It is not the number of uploads ever.
Number of uploads in
Probably
flight per job or per.
Globally across GitLab.com.
will be worth implementing it with a scan regardless.
Well, the idea, okay, if we want to
Just
be really
because-
Redis nerdy about it,
Yeah.
we haven't built this yet, or Eric hasn't built this yet. But what I think we'll do is to have a Redis hash, because the most common cases is that you say this blob is being uploaded, and when you finalize it, you delete it.
Yeah.
So adding and deleting from this data structure is the most common operation. And when you do
can still
cleanup,
scan the
you do an H scan of this Redis hash, and that is not. You don't want to do a ton of simultaneous H scans, but we would use concurrency control to do only one. So that will be fine, and it's not going to be a huge. It's not going to be a huge hash, because what is that number of simultaneous uploads you reasonably expect?
Yeah.
Maybe 1,000
Would
or
have
something. That's
expected
probably a lot.
100,000 failed downloads and uploads in the
Okay,
last.
yeah, that can happen, but still,
Yeah, I know.
a
I'm just
scan
being
is
facetious. Yeah.
doing an H scan. Well, one of the really important things, of course, is that it's a single key. So you do an H scan on that single key, and then as long as you have concurrency control, that is not going to blow up Redis.
No, definitely not.
And the other thing that we should eventually, we don't have to yet implement, but that we can also implement eventually, is to keep a Redis data structure when we of pending deletes. So we don't already do this, but one of the problems I tried to solve or think of a solution for earlier on was to track objects being created and objects about to be deleted, because I think maybe we still do send delete requests to object storage during a SQL transaction. So that's bad. And what you really want is, if you delete the artifact row from the database, you want to just say, oh, somebody should also make this delete request to the object storage backend to delete the object, but not while you're in a SQL transaction.
And you do that kind of in a generic way that we can use across different types of object storage, or is it not something that?
Well, yeah, this is where I got involved and started trying to nudge a little bit, because I want this to be generic. And it's going to live. We have a generic class that does all this crazy object storage copying stuff that I was talking about in the beginning. That is defined in one class. So in that class, we would also define this. The only problem is that in order to use this new behavior, you need to have a database column that you can store the random name in. So it would be an opt-in behavior. So over time, we would have to go through all the different types of uploaded artifacts and create a database column to say this is the actual name.
If only we had a single table that would contain all
Well,
of
that
this.
was a design I had in mind earlier, but you get a lot of churn on that table, and I like that this approach focuses on the most important part of the problem, which is, I think, the copy. And I think Redis is a suitable tool for this. And this is a more iterative approach. My idea of having a database table where we track all blobs and we do all these things is, well, I was trying to solve all these problems at once, but that makes it harder, makes it a harder project to work on. And now there are people who want to solve just the copy problem, and I think that we can iterate in the right direction here. This was very abstract with absolutely no pictures or code to look at. Some people still know what I'm talking about. But yeah, thanks for listening. And this is, this is still ongoing. But I'm excited that it's happening.
Out of interest, Jakob, are you like providing them with like kind of observability knowledge and that sort of side of things as well? Like saying like, hey, this is what, or like helping them out with the data and what's happening in production? Or just on the coding side, development side?
You mean to understand the scope of the problem they need to solve?
Yeah.
I think they haven't asked. They figured out on their own that they want to solve through another way that they want to solve this problem. I just got roped in because people were talking about the code side, like how do we implement this?
Awesome.
Yeah, is there something in specific about the actual behavior that's?
I was just sort of thinking that it's that one of the things that Scalability does is kind of convince people through the data and everything, but it sounds like they convince themselves. So
I wonder if error budgets did it. I'd have to ask, but probably these requests show up as slow in their error budgets dashboard.
Also, the people involved in the merge request are all pretty senior and know how to kind of navigate all of those things.
Yeah, and it's a long-standing problem. We actually monkey patch the cloud storage gem. We monkey patch something to make a server-side copy API call in the first place, because otherwise it would be a copy where we download the data from one place and upload it again to another place. The fact that we don't do that is thanks to weird monkey patching, and that monkey patching is there because people have been trying to fix this for years. So especially in the context of CI, it's a well-known problem. But yeah, but the best way to make the copy faster is to not do the copy. So I'm all for that.
It's not triggered by error budget because this problem has been identified like way before error budgets existed.
Yeah. It probably.
But 9 months ago, I did add the error budget improvement label, so I think it's, an investigation that I did then somewhere.
Yeah.
Made me do that.
It would be really interesting to know what percentage of Puma time on the cluster or maybe on the API is, because I mean that CI artifacts is a lot of time, right?
It's not just CI artifacts. I actually know that David Fernandez from Package was doing some queries where he was looking at the logs where we have external HTTP metrics. Wang Min added those 1 or 2 years ago. And so David was saying, well, if I have a request that is being handled by Package and it's making an external HTTP call, then that is almost certainly an object storage upload. And he came up with some staggering amount of time spent doing external HTTP calls. Yeah. And those are probably mostly the copies. Yeah. So it's going to save a lot of CPU time probably on the API fleet.
And the deletes you were talking about, we're moving those to the background, as in now that we're moving them outside of a transaction, are we also moving them out of the request?
I don't think that's part of this work. And I think that's why this work is likely to succeed, because it doesn't try to solve all these problems at the same time, as much as, to my mind, they're all part of the same design problem. But pragmatically, it's better to treat them as separate problems. I think we could already we could fix that in parallel, like completely independently, by doing yet another override of carrier wave behavior and saying if carrier wave thinks it's deleting a file, we instead
Schedule
would
a
some
worker with the
yeah
argument.
we schedule either schedule a worker or and maybe scheduling a worker is good enough now that I think about it, but do something that triggers the delete and don't actually do it synchronously. Yeah.
We have something like that for CI already. That's using a table in the database and has like works through them. No, wrong key.
Yeah. Yes, it's interesting that they use a table.
In the drawer, I think. Where's this one? Sorry.
It's interesting that they use a table.
Yeah.
I don't know if
same
it's
problems of transactions, right?
No, it's when you click a delete somewhere in the application, a whole bunch of stuff needs to happen, including deleting objects from artifacts and so on. And what they do is they create rows in a table saying these are all the things we need to delete, but now they don't count towards your storage or all of these things anymore. And then we just work through them. Like
yeah.
it's another hack on carrier wave, where carrier wave wants an object to be attached to, like an active record thing.
Yeah, but this is not avoiding doing the delete during the SQL transaction.
No.
There's another problem here that Andrew is maybe thinking of, which is that was actually what you just talked about, Bob. If you do a delete on one thing, then there is 1,000 dependent things that also need to be deleted. And the way Rails works is that it would load those as one row at a time and run the delete callbacks. And it sounds like what this is doing is to make sure that we don't do all that work during a web request. So we just make the delete button faster.
And sort of related, but not quite the same. We've also had outages or incidents where there've been cascading deletes in the database, right? From huge objects, or very attached objects from being deleted, but that's kind of different.
Yeah, so it's a different problem, but it's related, and it's also no, it's on David's mind, because package also has this problem, because some package features create lots of dependent records. So when people delete a package, then a whole bunch of stuff has to be deleted as a consequence. I think if we can get to a point where every now, actually, you don't even need that. But what you need is a way to say, here's a database record. Here's the path to an object that belongs to it, and I know it needs to be deleted, and I store that path somewhere. And now I just don't run the carrier wave callbacks for this object. But that doesn't solve the problem that you would have to instantiate lots of records from the database. You have this active record. Bob, is it destroy all or delete all?
Destroy all. Delete all is the fast one that does a single delete call without callbacks, and destroy does the loading and iterating. Yeah,
so I think destroy all is really the problem. There's a destroy all problem, which is orthogonal to object storage.
And it's not like the problem that Andrew was talking about, is the cascading deletes in the database itself, where we have
different
foreign keys.
Yeah,
enforced foreign keys, and then.
But that's supposed to be fast because it's the database and foreign keys.
It's fast, but if you do there's a limit to how much you can do at once, and that's why we have the loose foreign keys thing, and then we delete in Sidekick in the background.
Wow.
Yeah, there was at least one incident where something had a million things on it.
And it had the cascade, the cascading foreign key delete thing from the database, which does it very fast, but it's still like
it was just too much.
It was just too much, yeah.
Yeah.
Jakob, on the previous topic around CPU time saved or potential CPU time saved through not copying, do we plan to capture some data around that? Is it feasible to do so at this stage? And the reason I ask is, I guess, to Andrew's point earlier, I think at the beginning of the demo, Jakob, you said we got quite lucky that something that we worked on some while ago is now going to be useful and be used. And I think you're probably 90% right. But I think there also was some foresight, right, that we knew that it was an area that needed some investment, like object storage in general. But we didn't necessarily know maybe how to prove that, how to prove the value of it, or how to at least show the value at the time to kind of get that work prioritized. Do you think it's worthwhile trying to do that now, at least retrospectively?
I'm not sure. Well,
I
the
think the
question
team
is
is going to
who
look
cares
into
about the
that.
problem? And the CI people have stepped up and they already cared, and they've made it clear they care so much that they now want to have an engineer tackle this hairy problem.
I guess the question then is, why do they care now? What's changed? Is it pressure around costing? Is it causing like sort of performance bottlenecks? Is it?
It's a performance bottleneck, and my guess would be that probably there's a customer who does lots of large uploads, who sees lots of their large uploads fail, who somehow through their size has enough clout. That's one of the ways these things float up, right? There's always something that doesn't work right that users don't like, but how loud is the voice of the user? So it could be that if a user with a particularly loud voice is saying, please fix this. That's guessing, but that's what, considering it's on the product side, I expect something like that.
So what would be really awesome is if, like, when something like this happens, a team gets to reduce their latency thresholds on an endpoint. So if it's got a custom latency or a long latency, they bring it down because things are, and then we give them some special prize or something for doing that.
There's a project
need
that
to
we're working
gamify.
on in projections where we're identifying the highest traffic endpoints that have default or low urgency.
Yeah.
And we want to change that so they're medium or high urgency. But we can't do that for everyone, and we want to make it like incentivize other people to do
set
that.
up a bot that sends out discretionary bonuses to the authors of those MRs.
Where we could design a T-shirt.
Yeah.
That says something about I lowered my latency threshold, and then a team that does that gets the T-shirt.
Swag is always a way to go, isn't it?
I'm only half joking here. I think it would be like a really
Swag
good
would
thing.
work. I would love to send out swag to other to colleagues. That sounds
I mean,
fun.
but in all seriousness, this is a problem that should be visible in their error budgets, and don't people already care about problems that float up in their error budgets?
Not if they've set a really long latency.
Well,
They can cheat.
yeah, they can cheat. I don't know if this endpoint cheats. Let's have a look.
Well, but then it also depends whether it's cheating or not. Also depends on who uses it or how it gets used. And if something gets used a lot or gets used by users with a loud voice and it doesn't work well, then cheating doesn't help. Because the user will just say, my upload doesn't work.
It's also not just latency or performance focused, right? In terms of, presumably there'll be some cost benefit off the back of this, which I know we're not there yet, probably in terms of like really using that as an input into stage groups. But it just feels like this is an interesting use case to think about, like, what can we do to try and influence these decisions to be made earlier? Like, what data inputs can we give to the teams? Because as you say, I think naturally what happens is a big customer shouts louder than anyone else, and it naturally moves to the top of the backlog. Rarely do these things just like naturally make their way up. And it's kind of what leverage and what insights do we have to try and get this type of work prioritized sooner, which is kind of what we were trying to do with object storage improvements 9 months ago. But we just didn't really know how to, I guess, how to prove the benefit or show the benefit to some of the stage groups.
The threshold for that endpoint is currently set to low, so they would probably be able to
tighten that
up.
Yeah.
And we should send them a T-shirt if they do.
As to your first question, Liam, I think that latency really goes a long way, because latency correlates with user happiness, but it also correlates with CPU spent. So it's a proxy for both those things. So nobody should be burning up a lot of latency. But then, yeah, so then maybe the question is, what's
that's something
how do we get people to care? But we have a good proxy, I think, a good signal already. I'm not saying people don't care, but if you want to care more.
Yeah, and that's, again, back to Andrew's point, right? You sort of accept a status quo because each team has a ton of priorities, right? And if it's kind of good enough today, but where there are areas where we believe that there is significant room for improvement, it's, but how do we, I guess, shine more of a light on those things?
Yeah, it's also sometimes, I mean, this is a known problem. Everybody knows that the way this works now is not great. But it's not always clear that things can be improved in the first place. I think it depends on it's case by case. Like, is there a more efficient way to do this thing? Right here we can be more efficient by just not doing something. But just from seeing that something spends certain requests are slow doesn't tell you that there's the opportunity. You have to go in and look. That could be our job, to see things and look and say, or you can say it's the job of the team that owns the code to look at it. So we could go around saying to people, hey, you should look at this and see if it can be more efficient. But maybe they say we looked and we don't see a way, and then you can argue with that because they don't. But that doesn't mean there isn't a way.
Yeah, I guess this comes back to the ownership and sort of shared services discussion, or components, right? Where there are areas that we know will have like a object storage, right? Improvements there can have an exponential effect because it's used by multiple teams.
Yeah, well, but the motivation here is not even the multiplier. It's just that this one feature alone is important and is one of the heaviest users. Well, probably the heaviest user of object storage at GitLab is registry, but registry is an isolated application, and we don't seem to have to help them much. But within the Rails app, artifacts are probably, together with, I don't know if artifacts or package are bigger, but they're probably the biggest things. I think the way this is playing out is good, because we or the team that owns CI is or that owns these artifact uploads is there's a more real need motivating this work. If we sit and we look at something and we say this doesn't look optimal, the question, okay, it's not optimal, but who cares?
That's the thing that I found hard to convince people of. Like, for example, what I was recently looking into together with Hercules a little bit was slow Git endpoints, info refs, and internal allowed. And I, as a user of GitLab, noticed that these things are slow and that competitors it's faster, and I think they should be faster. And the error budgets also show that. The thresholds are 1 second or 5 seconds in some cases. But that's not in, like, so now we're going to end up creating issues for those endpoints. Like, let's see how, let's make them faster and set higher urgencies on them. But what's the carrot? Why would they? Because I complained that the endpoint's slow and my Git push is slow. Well, I complained about that a lot already. But apparently there's no customers complaining about that. There's no customers complaining enough about things that we notice.
So just kind of on that point, one of the things that will be quite interesting is that with dedicated, we're going to have like much better metrics and insights into what's making customer, at the moment we'll often, customers say, oh, this thing's slow or that's slow. We don't have the same kind of metrics as we have on GitLab.com, and we certainly don't have logs or anything like that in most cases. And it's very difficult to actually diagnose what the problem is for these customers. And now with Dedicated, we'll have sort of a insight into what a lot of self-managed customers are experiencing. And so we'll be able to use that as a proxy and say like, hey, this is directly affecting this customer. And by definition, they're all big customers. And so there'll be some weight behind that, but I'm really excited about the observability part of Dedicated and seeing other customers. Not, GitLab.com is one case, but there's a lot of other cases that self-managed customers hit that we don't necessarily see on GitLab.com, which we'll see with Dedicated and the observability we got there. Especially because the instance sizes are kind of fixed. It's not like GitLab.com where we just, scale infinitely. A reference architecture is a reference architecture. And so if a customer is using, all the CPU to do their uploads, that's going to quickly become limited. And they're going to say, oh, this is really slow. And then we'll investigate and go, well, it's because the artifacts endpoint is, doing these silly things. And so I think there's going to be a whole new sort of line of infra-dev issues that come out of Dedicated at some point. And it will benefit, like, particularly self-managed a lot, other self-managed customers, hopefully, and us on GitLab SaaS or GitLab.com.
Yeah, I agree. I think the scaling constraints are very different on Dedicated, but that and the workload is very different. It's a completely different. I want to call it a sample because GitLab.com is such a diverse set of use cases and workloads, and it's very easy for
bad stuff to be lost.
Yes, exactly. Like we have this like multiple years of terrible row level lock contention that that only occasionally gets attention, but has been present for a very long time. Just as kind of a recent top of mind example, that would be completely intolerable if there was a more uniformly invested user base, which I think is the one of the distinctive features for Dedicated. Everyone using that particular system is from the same company, from the same user base. And
Matt, I mean, you've been on those premium customer calls many times as well, right? And you've seen these are things that are happening, but because you don't have the observability and anything you ask takes 5 days to get a response on, as opposed to 5 seconds, it's so difficult to diagnose those problems.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so I share your optimism. I think we're going to get a lot of good out of it.
Can more people get access to observability stuff in Dedicated? I'm not talking logs, obviously, but metrics would be nice.
It's good. I mean, it would be a very good thing to raise up and
I just got the shared 1Password thing from Cristiano that I still need to look at. But that only solved the problem for me, and I'm curious, so I'm going to look around. But
yeah. I mean, I think so. One of the themes that's coming up about this year and about like the goals of infrastructure and scalability and platform and is kind of like we should be moving towards like a single, not thinking of GitLab.com and GitLab Dedicated as separate places. And they're all GitLab SaaS. They're just different things of that. And so one of the things that ties into is like scalability, working on those GitLab Dedicated issues as well. And so that ties in directly with like, GitLab Dedicated should have access to those metrics. Yeah, logs is a little bit more tricky, for everyone. But certainly the metrics are going to be,
also,
I think it's really
comparing tenants and so on would be interesting. So having all of the metrics in one place.
Yeah.
But are at least some people allowed to look at the logs, or how does that work?
Yeah. So I mean, I mean, even support people are not ever. Sorry, that's kind of the wrong way to say it. But support people have got access to the logs. And you know, at the moment, it's really poorly done. You know, and that's on dedicated, and you know, because we haven't had time. But there's this shared login, right? And so there's a read-only Kibana login, which needs to be fixed pronto. But there's stuff with Okta that needs to be done in order to get that right.
Yeah.
And complication. But yeah, but at the end of it, like, yeah, I mean, technically our logs are only supposed to have, you know, they're supposed to be fairly secure, but obviously you can still see project names, which some people get more upset about than others, right? And usernames and IP address. Yeah, I think there's like, certainly if there's
as long as there's people
problem, or you know, in Scalability should be the first team to get in there and be diagnosing those things. And you need logs for that.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, whoever is working on this, they will need logs. Logs are, and I understand, but I was curious what the balance was here, because I understand that the expectations of the customers are different in the case of dedicated, when it's or they might be different when it comes to their logs. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, so far, you know, dodgy old me in South Africa has got access to the logs, so they can't be that strict, right? So yeah, I'm sure that it'll, I don't know if it'll change, and it very likely will, but obviously then FedRAMP's a whole different kettle of fish.
Right.
But,
yeah.
But that's always going to be different. But certainly the dedicated ones.
I suppose it goes a long way. Well, I guess one thing we need is the same tools. So people, like if we have people who are not, say, allowed to look at FedRAMP, but who know how to craft certain log queries, they should be able to give those queries to somebody who is allowed to look at FedRAMP.
Yeah.
And we should be, I guess the support people who are allowed to look at FedRAMP should at least be allowed to look at the .com logs. So
yeah, also the difference is, right, like we're using Kibana in both cases, and we know what the fields are and everything, where like when I've been talking to customers,
yeah, exactly this problem. Yeah,
you know, it's like, you know, yeah, it's like everyone's them and the field names are different, and like, you know, what you can run on those systems are completely different.
Stephanie and I were looking at one customer escalation where I ended up taking JSON logs and ingesting them into SQLite, because I just had to count some things, and there was no Kibana or anything. And like you say, the field names would have been different. I had to go through so much friction just to do some elementary log queries. And if we have people at least on the same logging stack, and everybody knows what queries to run, then
and the turnaround time will be minutes and not like a week, which is often the case at the moment, because I have to get approval from someone to send you the you know, just on that, I don't know, it's something that I've been meaning to ask with some support people, but has anyone actually used Loki CLI mode? Because, you know, Loki, the log, they've got a mode where you don't run it as a server, but you just run it as a CLI across your logs, and you can use the Loki QL query language and do all the things in CLI mode. And I think, like, if you could get that binary onto a machine where there's logs, you could really do some useful stuff. Obviously, you can do a lot of it
in the normal self-managed support scenario, you mean?
Yeah, or, you know, on the those kind of situations. But I haven't actually,
because we'd never have those raw logs for .com. For .com or dedicated, we'd never have those raw log files, right? We would always be in Kibana.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but on most of the customers, either they don't have anything, or they've got some strange custom system, or, you know, it's like a tool that doesn't have any analysis, you know, can't roll anything up. But the last thing I just wanted to say as well was that I think one of the things that's kind of interesting is that some of the customers that are moving to dedicated, or often what I hear is like, oh, we're having these really bad performance issues, so what we're going to do is we're going to move to dedicated, and then, you know, everything's going to magically get fixed. And obviously that's not the case.
That means then dedicated has very bad performance issues.
Yeah, exactly. but at least we'll then hit those problems and we might hopefully be able to solve them, as opposed to, you know, how it is at the moment, which is, and that'll fix other people as well, which is good.
That's a hilariously expensive escalation path. We're changing platforms so it becomes your problem.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's a really interesting sales methodology as well.
I don't know. I think it makes a lot of sense that people want dedicated.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're going to be we're going to have to solve interesting problems.
But yeah, and the you know, the value, the kind of, if we get it right and we have the value out of like all the forecast, you know, the forecast, the capacity planning on the customers, and you know, the security side and what they bring to the table, like we can really scale that up, right, and really kind of add a lot of extra value over just the straight like, hey, we're running your instance for you. But
yeah, there are some interesting constraints too with dedicated, and I'm not quite sure how we'll solve them. Like for example, sometimes with GitLab.com, we'll identify an anti-pattern, implement a feature flagged new behavior, and roll that out, toggling it on and off with feature flags. But the turnaround time for deploying you know, an experimental workaround on .com is, I think, generally going to be much shorter than it would be for dedicated, right? Because dedicated, I thought part of the value proposition was dedicated had, customers of dedicated had some input on the cadence for deployments.
They don't have cadence on the deployments. They don't have inputs, but they are one major version to the latest patch behind.
Okay.
Which is obviously, so if you're backporting those things, they'll get them straight away.
Okay.
But even then, we don't do daily deploys. We only do once a week deploys. So it gets slow.
And those are named versions, right?
Yeah. It's like, and it's not like hot like
yesterday's, right?
Yeah, and that's like a feature, right? Like that's something that
you mean one minor version behind, right? Not major. One minor version behind your latest.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. A minor version behind. Yeah.
Okay.
Would be very
so it is still possible. It would just be like measured in days rather than weeks or months. Okay.
I mean, I could imagine if, and this is just me completely speculating, but if there was a serious enough problem with the customer, you could probably bend that a bit.
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Cool. That seems like a very reasonable set of trade-offs.
Yeah.
How I've not looked at any of the dedicated systems. So having metrics, logs, and the capacity to run ad hoc observability tools are kind of the three pillars of being able to answer difficult questions about system behavior. Does someone, can we put together a set of people that have all three of those things?
Yeah, I mean, so certainly on the metrics, I think we should all get access. Like, you know, I think it's something I can raise an issue about it if you like, because it ties in with the theme of you know, one SaaS platform, and then the on the logs. I think the thing with the logs is like probably on a needs be basis until we get Okta, and then we can actually see who's logging in, as opposed to at the moment, which is like, oh, the account logged in, which is super sketch, right?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
Like I'm kind of thinking of like an escalation thing where maybe a few of us get pulled into doing analysis. If we can just do a screen share with someone that's got access to the logs, that's sufficient.
Yeah, that should be possible immediately, right? Like with any of the dedicated team.
Yeah, fantastic. And do members of the dedicated team have like pSQL access, Redis CLI access? Can we run perf, BPF tools?
Yes. I mean, they can get onto the machines.
Yes.
And yeah, so it's a little bit tricky because we kind of go through layers to get in there. but ultimately you can, because we realized pretty quickly that it's very difficult to do anything as an operator without a break loss procedure.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Okay, cool. Yeah, I knew that the situation would be very different, but I wasn't sure what where we landed on it.
Yeah, it's I mean it's basically there's a role, an IAM role that's a break loss. And then because we use SSM Instance Connect or one of those AWS SSH like technologies, you can, once you're in that role, you can kind of jump on anywhere and do anything. But it's all audited, which is really nice.
Yes, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, fantastic.
Awesome.
Thanks for chatting about this.
Yeah, it's been a good chat. I think I've got to run as well. I think I've got to do childcare, but thanks everyone.
I didn't have anything else.
Yeah, I didn't. I was like, I guess we're done. Yeah. Have a good day, Matt.
Yeah. How are you doing, Stephanie?
I'm fine.
I haven't kept up with the work that you're spearheading.
It's going. Mostly fighting MRs, getting them approved on the Rails, etc. side, but I think that's almost done. So we should be hopefully start moving forward on splitting off the repository cache. I'm hoping we'll start moving the staging ones next week. We'll see if MRs have not been merged yet, so stay tuned. But yeah, it's about where we're at.
Sweet. That's fantastic.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. I'm really excited. I want some really fun graphs.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep, but we are moving forward, and yeah. The other thing we're doing, the important job, is we're fighting about what we will call the DB load balancing Redis.
Yes. Okay.
When we split that off, vitally important. What will we name it?
Oh yes, right. Okay.
You know, the important things in the world.
Yes. No, naming is hard.
Yeah. So I suspect that as soon as we start moving forward with the Redis repository cache, I'll grab whichever backend engineer happens to be the person I'm working with at the time, and we'll start doing the work to get DB load balancing started. So
yeah,
hopefully we can plow through both of these relatively quickly, and hopefully at some point you will have an end date for Redis cluster, and I'll know when I don't have to do this anymore.
Yeah.
But I think the holidays have saved us.
Yeah.
In everything, because we got quite a bit of time with less traffic. So we've given ourselves a little bit of leeway.
That's a good point. Yeah, I was thinking of it as lost time, but I guess it's also time without the system being under stress.
Yeah. So, I mean, right now Redis cache is actually trending downward, which won't be the case. But yeah. So we're moving forward at the speed that makes sense with the pressure, with the knowledge that if the pressure changes on the Redis cache side, the speed will have to change. So yeah, like I told Rachel yesterday was, as long as everything is still fine, we're going to keep moving at roughly this speed. But if everything isn't fine, we're going to need a lot more people and to do it a lot faster. So yeah, that's where we're at.
Cool.
How's Redis cluster?
Yeah, I think it's been slow to ramp back up after everyone's been out. I've got what the time zone spread is really killing me. I desperately want to have kind of a project meeting to get to kind of get on the same page about where the risks are, where the big questions are for sizing the milestones, and I have some very definite opinions about where, like, some of them I have a pretty good sense of how of the task involved and the risks involved and roughly how long I think they would take under ideal circumstances. And then there are two pieces where I really don't have an idea. And I would love to get, like, I know some of the folks on the team are going to have, like Sylvester in particular, are going to have some very definite opinions about at least one of those areas. It's a big question mark for me. And I think that means I need to set up a meeting for, like, midnight-ish my time, because that'll have enough overlap for Sylvester and the folks in Europe. Late in his day, early in their day, and I think I need that to happen to get us in sync on those points. So that's kind of top of mind for me, and I'm trying to get along as best I can without that. But I feel like that's going to be kind of the key to unlocking a reasonable estimate and de-risking the whole sequence of events.
Yeah, the Europe part complicates things. Like, I have at least the benefit of that. The functional partitioning part is just Singapore and me.
Yeah.
So I'm easier if I need to set up a synchronous conversation. Europe complicates things. Although I have met with both Sylvester and Marco several times early in my morning.
Okay.
So you may be able to find a time that isn't midnight your time, but is instead like 7 a.m. your time. I would prefer midnight, given the two options, but I suspect that you may have a different opinion. So, like,
yeah. No, it's true. I've not been sleeping well recently, so I've been up at midnight and 7. And
oh, great, cool.
And it's catching up with me.
I get it. Cool.
But
things are good. Things are good.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Yep. I'm so glad to hear that.
I'm looking forward to actual progress on all of this, and
absolutely.
But
me too.
We're getting there. It's like the holidays are always tough.
Yeah.
Holidays are always tough just because of people being gone, everybody being distracted. Yeah.
Yep, for sure.
Cool. Well, enjoy your Redising.
Yes, likewise to you.
Yes, thanks.
Alrighty. Chat later.
Bye.
Bye.